I imagine at one time you were this brilliant little child. As we enter into adulthood, what was brilliant in childhood can actually get in the way of you living the life you want to live. Hello, friends. I'm Nancy Houston. I want to help you live a better life. We're all emotional creatures who sometimes think. And so it's so important that we make this journey from our heads into the depths of our hearts. Welcome to the In-Between with Nancy Houston. Hello, everyone. So glad that you're with us, my dear friends. We love you. Today, we just want to do a little something special because it's Christmas time, and it is a special time of year. So I read a story decades ago, and it's always stayed with me. During World War I, they had tried to navigate some sort of ceasefire for Christmas Eve, but they couldn't get people to agree with the idea. So it just sort of happened in its own organic ways. So imagine with me that there are troops that are dug in, and they are in muddy foxholes, and it's cold, it's bitter cold, in the middle of December. And all these boys who are fighting these battles thought that the war would be over after 6 months. But instead, this war lasted for 4 years. World War I lasted for 4 years, and 15 million lives were lost. But on this particular night, when Pope Benedict had begged the higher-ups to give the troops a night off, the night off when the angels would sing, he begged them to, but they refused. So spontaneously, on this particular battlefield, suddenly it all went quiet because they could hear the enemy on the other side singing a Christmas carol. The Germans had begun to sing Silent Night, Holy Night. And the battlefield went still. Guns were lowered. Helmets came off. And then the English joined in the choir, and together they sang Holy Night together. Silent Night, Holy Night together. A peace settled over the barbed wire battlefield. Men's hearts began to open up and to warm. I can imagine in those foxholes how freezing cold they were, and suddenly their hearts began to warm. A gentle snow began to fall on the ground and blanket the ground. They looked up into the starry night and were reminded of the Star of Bethlehem that led the wise men to the manger where Jesus was born. It truly was a holy night. Those men, once the war was over, wrote frequently of the ceasefire that just took place without anybody negotiating it. They just did it on their own. Later on, some of those men came out who, just a day earlier had been trying to kill each other. They came out of the foxholes. They exchanged cigarettes. One story said that a man who was a barber gave the enemy free haircuts for cigarettes. There was a soccer ball that appeared, and they played soccer on a field. They exchanged bottles of wine. And then the next day, they had to go back to fighting for country and for families and for their convictions. And that's what they did. But on that night, they opened their hearts. I want to invite us to open our hearts this Christmas season, to take some time to get still, to reflect on your own life, on the world around you, on how can we be a part of bringing peace to this world that oftentimes lacks peace. How can we find peace within ourselves? You know the story of Mary, this young 13-year-old girl. Can you imagine? She's 13 years old. I'm just thinking of my almost 13-year-old granddaughter, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what if all of this was happening to my Lola Kate? It seems so young. to be 13 years old, and she's already betrothed to be married, which basically means that she'll have this year-long engagement. She's engaged to a man that most likely her father has arranged this marriage. His name is Joseph. And then suddenly one day, an angel appears. The angel Gabriel appeared. I think there must have been something fearsome about an angel appearing, because when the angel appeared to Zechariah 6 months before the angel appeared to Mary, he went silent. Or actually, it was more than 6 months. It would have been 6 months plus 9 months. Zacharias was the priest on duty when Gabriel appeared to him. And when he appeared, Gabriel said things to him about Elizabeth, who they were old. Zachariah and Elizabeth were old, and they had been barren. They had never produced a child in all their years of being married. And then the angel says, your wife Elizabeth is going to have a baby. And Zacharias is like, how can this possibly happen? And the angel said, because of your doubt, you're going to be silent for the next 9 months. And sure enough, he was. Well, that same angel appeared to this 13-year-old girl and said to her, well, let me just read it from the Message Bible because it's so beautiful. It said, good morning. You're beautiful with God's beauty. Boy, isn't that something for us to remember? That true beauty comes from God. It's not how we look on the outside. It's really what God is doing with us on the inside. That's where true beauty comes from. You're beautiful inside and out. God be with you. She was thoroughly shaken. I imagine she really was shaking, wondering what was behind a greeting like that. But the angel assured her, Mary, you have nothing to fear. God has a surprise for you. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son and call his name Jesus. I wonder if God has some surprises for you in 2024. And if you'd be willing to open up your heart like Mary opened hers in that moment, even though she was terrified, nonetheless, she responded by saying, yes, I see it all now. I'm the Lord's maid, ready to serve. Let it be with me just as you say. Her heart became wide open. I love that thought. How many times do our hearts get hardened in life? How many times do we shut down our own emotions because we believe that our emotions are dangerous, or we believe that we're all alone and we have to figure out this life by ourselves, or we have to figure out how we're going to manage or cope, forgetting that actually God sent Jesus to this world to be with us, to take away our aloneness, to take away our fear. Over and over in the Bible, it says, for every day of the year, it says, do not be afraid. And yet so many times we can live our lives being afraid. And none of us are at our best when we're afraid. We shut down all of our creativity. We become uptight. We become anxious. We start grabbing instead of having our hands opened. We close our hands. We make a fist. And we have to make things work. It's a really hard way of doing life. And I just want to invite you during this Christmas season to start thinking about, how could you do life differently? How could 2024 be a different year for you? How could right now become a different day for you? I do truly believe the difference starts when we open up our hearts, when we let the hardness of our hearts melt like wax, when we let the troubles start rolling off the back of our necks and off of our shoulders, when we invite Jesus to come in and do the impossible and the unlikely. The angel reminded Zechariah of that, and Elizabeth of that, and most likely Mary of that, and Joseph of that. Remember, all things are possible if only we believe. Last year, my daughter-in-law's father passed away right before Thanksgiving. And on a cool, crisp, sunny afternoon, we buried him. While we were at the burial site, I just was reminded that all things are possible with God. As a matter of fact, that night, I had a dream that Lauren's daddy walked through the gravesite and just quietly walked up beside each person and said, remember, all things are possible, only believe. That dream will never forget. I will never forget that dream. I hope it stays with me all the days of my life. That this man, it was like he's in heaven now, and he was looking down on the earth, and he came back and he walked amongst us, and he said, all things are possible, only believe. I believe that the reason all things are possible is because of what Jesus came to do for each and every one of us. His mission statement is laid out in Isaiah 61 long before he ever came to this earth. God knew exactly what he was going to do. He knew that we were going to need hope. And so I want to read Isaiah 61 to you. I think it's my favorite passage in all of the Bible. I remember when I was beginning my healing process from my childhood, where I had a lot of trauma, that Isaiah 61 became the passage that I probably revisited daily for 6 months. I read this passage daily because I needed to know who God was for me. I needed to know what his purpose and plan was for me. And this is what he says. This is Jesus's mission statement. So listen to it through the ears of, this is what Jesus came to do for you, for me, for every single one of us. And it says, the Spirit of God, the Master, is on you, on Jesus, because God anointed him. He sent me, Jesus, to preach the good news to the poor. And aren't we all poor in some ways? Maybe you have lots of money, but all of us are poor in spirit. We're all bankrupt in spirit. We're all needy in spirit. None of us can do this life alone. And we weren't meant to do this life alone. He sent me to preach good news to the poor and to heal the heartbroken. You know, so many times we think, oh man, if I could just get my head on straight. But he didn't come to heal the head broken, to heal the ways we have been messed up in our heads. I mean, I think he will. But first of all, he came to heal the brokenhearted. Have you been heartbroken? Have you paused long enough to realize that, yeah, there's things in this life that have actually broken my heart? Have you taken the time to realize that Jesus came to heal your broken heart? And if you'll let him heal your broken heart, then he'll help with the ways your thinking is also broken. But it starts here. It starts right here with an openness to let him begin this process in your life. So he wants to heal the brokenhearted. And then it says, announce freedom to all captives and pardon to all prisoners. So I remember when I started my healing process, I would have dreams that I was in the bottom of a well, stuck in a cage, and I couldn't get out. I really couldn't get out. And I didn't know how to get out. And I was stuck there. And it was dark. And it was scary. And I felt all alone. And I started crying out to God, and God brought me help. And then eventually, I felt that prison door open. And of course, I was terrified to step outside of it because it was what I knew. It was familiar. It felt like home to me, even though it was a terrible home, but yet it was the home I knew. You know, so many times what we know can become what we're comfortable with, and what we're comfortable with can become our comfort zone. And our comfort zones can become where we're stuck and where we live. And in some ways, we like it. At least it's familiar. I remember hearing a story from a woman who would go to AA because she had been an alcoholic most of her life, and she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And she told this story one night to her group. She said, you know, I just keep going down the same street and falling into the same pit. And somebody said to her, well, why don't you go down a different street? And she paused and she thought for a moment. And she said, because I know that street and I know that pit. And that pit feels familiar. So all of us have our pits. All of us have our prisons. All of us have our places where we are being held captive by resentments, by blaming others, by regrets, by our own bad decisions, by shame, by the things that have been done to us, and by the things that we've done to ourselves. I want to invite you to consider letting go of your shame. I want you to consider letting go of your resentments. Your life is too short to live it full of resentment. I can promise you, if you hang on to your resentment, someday you're going to wake up an old person. And I know you young ones, you think you're never going to get old, but you will. You will. The aging process is inevitable. It happens to all of us, no matter how hard we try to fight it. And someday you will wake up a bitter old person if you don't learn how to let go of your resentments, of blaming, whether it's blaming yourself or blaming others. Maybe you need to take a few minutes out and give shame back to that person who abused you. Give the shame that you've been carrying around for years or months or decades, and stop and realize, oh my gosh, I am carrying the shame of my perpetrator around inside of me. I have been carrying that weight. I have been a prisoner to their shame, to their behaviors. I have been held captive by somebody else's shame. So today, I want to invite you to do, you might think this is so stupid, but I want to invite you to pull up an empty chair in front of you, visualize that person sitting in front of you, and say today, and name that person. Let's say the perpetrator's Tom. Say, today, Tom, I give you back your shame. When you touched my body in a way that you did not have permission to touch me, that was your shameful behavior. That was your sexual shame, not mine. So today, I give you back your sexual shame. Maybe it's a mother or father that screamed at you, hit you, yelled at you, called you worthless. Maybe it's time to put them in the chair and say, hey, today, I give you back your shame. You had no business talking to me that way. I was a child. I have intrinsic value because God made me. And because he made me, I have value. So you have no right to talk to me that way. So today, I give you back those worthless messages. I give you back the way I felt when you yelled at me, when you told me I was a loser, you told me I was a failure. That was wrong of you, and I give you back all of that shame. I want you to just sit with those feelings for a moment. Notice what comes up for you. Notice what's there. What feelings are there? And start giving that back to whoever that shame belongs to. Your life is too precious to live it feeling somebody else's shame. Man, life is way too short to do that. So consider giving it back, because Jesus came to set you free from regrets. Now, maybe you need to forgive yourself. So maybe it's you need to put into that empty chair, your younger self, and say to your younger self, hey, yeah, you made some mistakes. Who hasn't? Yeah, you made some stupid choices. Who hasn't? Welcome to the human race. And today, I'm going to forgive you for some of the stupid things you've done. Because God never wants you to live in a prison of regret, a prison of shame, a prison of guilt. He came to set you free from all of that. That's what he came to do. He didn't come to punish you. He didn't come to tell you what a failure you are. He didn't come to tell you how pitiful you are. He came to lift you up. Just like he wanted to lift those soldiers out of those muddy trenches that night. He came to lift you out of that muddy trench you've been rolling around in. It's time for you to get out of that pit and move forward with the life that God has for you. So there's more good news. I'm going to read some more of it to you. God sent me to announce the year of his grace. So I want 2024 to be a year of grace for you, a celebration of God's destruction of our enemies, to care for the needs of all who mourn in Zion. Man, I think this is huge. Did you know that God mourns with those who mourn? He grieves with those who grieve. I think a lot of times we walk around with a lot of grief on our shoulders, weighing us down. I remember one time I went to a doctor and my dad had just died. And even though my dad had times where he was abusive, I still really love my dad. My dad was an amazing man. My dad was raised by a man who fought in World War I. And then my dad fought in World War II. These are men who had a lot of trauma, and trauma had done a lot of damage to their lives. And then they had damage, so then they damaged their children and their grandchildren. I don't think on purpose. It's just they had lived some hard lives. So I love my dad. And I was trying to figure out, how do I grieve a man who brought trauma to me, but also I loved him. He also brought good stuff into my life. He was fun. He took me on a lot of adventures. He was smart. He gave me a good work ethic. I mean, the man did so many good things for me. And so I went to this doctor and she said, Nancy, I think you have pneumonia because you need to grieve. You're carrying some heavy grief, and usually grief lands in your lungs. And so she said, I want you to go home. I want you to get out a journal, and I want you to write about all the things you're sad about losing your dad. And so I did it. I went home and I just started writing. And you know how whenever you do that, at least for me, I don't really feel much. It takes a while, but I just kept writing all these years of relationship I had with my dad. And man, after a while, the tears started flowing. And I truly grieved him. And within a few hours, I promise you, my lungs had cleared up. And I no longer felt sick, because grief can make us literally feel sick. The latest research says that every human needs to have a good boo-hoo once a week. And there's just sad stuff that happens. If it's not to you personally, then somebody you know or love, or my goodness, you watch the news and there's sad things happening in the world around us. So here's the thing. Jesus wants to comfort you. But if you refuse to grieve, he cannot comfort you because you won't receive it. Again, we've got to open up our hearts. So I want to encourage you today, hey, he'll mourn with you if you'll grieve, and he'll comfort you if you will grieve. So take a few minutes out before Christmas. I'd like it if Christmas could be a day of joy for you. But if you're going into the season carrying all kinds of sad things, take some time out to grieve so you can receive the comfort that Jesus has for you. Then it goes on to say, the good news just keeps coming, right? He said to care. He wants to care for the needs of all who mourn and give them bouquets of roses instead of ashes. Wow, isn't that beautiful? A praising heart instead of a languid spirit. Man, isn't it true? Grief just drains us of joy, and grief is heavy and tiring and exhausting. So make sure you take some time to grieve what's made you sad so you can get some joy instead. He wants to give you a message of joy instead of news of doom. He wants to rename you oaks of righteousness, planted by God to display his glory. Man, that's who you are. You're like this beautiful, towering oak tree planted beside streams of water. That's who you are. Maybe you haven't known who you are, and it's time for you to receive a new name. Maybe it's time for you to stop thinking, my name is worthless. My name is unlovable. My name is whatever horrible name you've taken on. That's not true. It's not who you are. God wants to rename you today and say, hey, your name is Oak of Righteousness. That's a picture of stability. It's a picture of being a solid, secure, loved, stable human being. And that's who you are, my friend. It goes on to say, then I'll rebuild the old ruins. Man, whatever feels like wreckage in your life, God wants to rebuild it. And he'll raise a new city out of the wreckage. They'll start over on the ruined cities and take the rubble left behind and make it new. Isn't that beautiful? He wants to make your life, whatever feels like has been rubble, it's been a wreck. Maybe you feel like your life has been hit by a tornado or a hurricane, or like a bomb has blown up in your life this year. Maybe it's been a really hard year for you. Maybe you've gone through a divorce. Maybe you've lost a loved one. Maybe you lost a job. Maybe you've had some sort of heartache this year. I want to tell you, God's with you. You're not alone. And he wants to take what has felt like it's been blown up and build something way better. Way better. That's what he came to do for you. Your life isn't over. You're not finished. I don't care how old you are, how young you are. There's time. If you'll let God rebuild your life, he wants to rebuild it. And then last of all, it finishes here with saying, because you got a double dose of trouble or a double dose of shame, and more than your share of contempt Your inheritance in the land will be doubled, and your joy will go on forever. So, my friends, that's why this little baby came to earth, impregnated by the Holy Spirit, this young Virgin Mary. And this is why God sent this baby to be born. A Savior came to do all of this for you, to heal your brokenhearted, to set you free from your prison, to open the door on that prison and let you get out of there. You get a get out of jail card is what you're getting. And then to rebuild the rubble from your past into something beautiful. He calls you now. He's renamed you and said, hey, you're an oak of righteousness. What if you started living out of that name, out of that identity? And then wherever you got a boatload of contempt, which is, contempt is, oh man, it's a word for like maybe hating you, despising you, blowing you off, ghosting you, telling you you're worthless. Instead of all that, he wants to give you a double blessing of joy and more joy. And not just for you, but for your children and for your children's children. So, my dear friends, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. Yeah. And I pray that instead of a heavy heart, that your hearts would be lifted today. And that instead of Christmas being sad and lonely, that you'd realize you're not alone. God is with you. And it's more than presents. It's more than food. It's more than our decorations. That this is really what Christmas is all about. So Merry Christmas from my heart to yours.